The billionaire's daughter hadn't slept in 3 weeks until the old maid did the impossible, the silent miracle. The scream was not just a sound, it was a physical blow that shattered the oppressive silence of the Sterling estate. It was a raw, guttural cry of exhaustion that tore through the marble hallways, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings and piercing the heavy oak doors of the master study. James Sterling, a man who could move markets with a single phone call and dismantle competitors with a signature, sat behind his mahogany desk with his head buried in his hands. He was trembling. For the first time in his 32 years of life, the billionaire was completely, utterly powerless. 3 weeks, he whispered, his voice cracking. It has been 3 weeks. Across from him, Dr. Vance, the most expensive pediatric sleep specialist in New York, adjusted his glasses nervously. Mr. Sterling, as I've explained physically, Lily is fine. It's a behavioral cycle, the trauma of losing her mother, combined with the disruption in her circadian rhythm. James slammed his fist onto the desk, making the crystal tumblers jump. Don't talk to me about circadian rhythms. She is 18 months old. She hasn't slept more than 40 minutes at a time since the funeral. She is screaming until she vomits. Fix it. We are trying, the doctor stammered, checking his watch. The night nurses are administering the prescribed melatonin dosage. The nursery is temperature controlled to the exact degree. We have the white noise machines. We have the sensory deprivation curtains. We are doing everything science allows. James stood up, his tailored navy suit feeling like a straitjacket. He walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling, manicured gardens that felt more like a cemetery than a home. Science isn't working. Listen to her. Even through the soundproof glass, he could feel the vibration of her distress. His daughter Lily, his golden-haired angel who used to giggle when he tickled her toes. Now she was a ghost of herself, dark circles under her eyes, her skin pale and blotchy from constant crying. Since his wife Elena had died in that car accident a month ago, Lily had refused to sleep. It was as if she was terrified that if she closed her eyes, her father would disappear too. "I'm going up there," James announced, turning abruptly. "Sir, I wouldn't advise it," Dr. Vance warned, standing up. "Your anxiety feeds hers. The head nanny, Miss Collins, has strict instructions to use the cry-it-out method tonight. If you intervene, you reset the progress." James ignored him. He stormed out of the study, his Italian leather shoes clicking rapidly against the cold marble floor. As he ascended the grand staircase, the crying grew louder. It was a sound of pure abandonment. It twisted a knife in his gut. He reached the second-floor landing. The staff he passed, maids in crisp uniforms, butlers carrying silver trays, averted their eyes. They were terrified of him, and they were terrified of the baby. The cursed child, he had heard one of them whisper last week. He had fired the woman on the spot, but the name stuck in his mind. James marched down the long corridor toward the nursery. Outside the door, 2 nannies were whispering frantically. "I can't do it anymore," one was saying, her eyes red. "She bit me. She literally bit me when I tried to put her in the crib. It's demonic." "Hush, he's coming," the other hissed. James brushed past them without a word. He reached for the golden handle of the nursery door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He prepared himself for the noise. He steeled himself to see his daughter's purple, tear-streaked face screaming for a mother who would never come back. He pushed the door open. He froze. There was no sound. The silence was so sudden, so absolute, that James stopped breathing. His first instinct was panic. She stopped breathing. "She's gone." Her heart gave out from the stress. "Lily?" he choked out, stepping into the room. The nursery was dimly lit, the late afternoon sun filtering through the heavy velvet drapes in dusty golden beams. The high-tech monitors were blinking silently. The white noise machine had been turned off. The air didn't smell like the sterile hospital disinfectant Dr. Vance insisted on. It smelled different, like lavender soap and old wool. James's eyes scanned the room frantically. The crib, the $10,000 custom-designed crib imported from Sweden, was empty. His panic spiked. He took a step forward, ready to shout for security, when movement in the corner caught his eye. There, in the old rocking chair that Elena had bought at a flea market, the one the interior designers had tried to throw away 3 times, sat a figure. It wasn't Miss Collins with her master's degree in child psychology. It wasn't one of the young, attractive nannies in their pristine white uniforms. It was Martha. James blinked, trying to process what he was seeing. Martha was one of the cleaning staff. He didn't even know her last name. She was an older black woman, perhaps 60, with grey hair pulled back in a severe, neat bun. She wore the heavy, traditional black dress of the cleaning crew, with a crisp white collar and cuffs that looked like they belonged in another century. She was not supposed to be in here. The cleaning staff was strictly forbidden from interacting with the family, especially the baby. It was rule number 1 in Mrs. Higgins's household manual. But there she was. Martha was rocking back and forth, a slow, hypnotic rhythm. On her lap, curled up into a tiny ball, was Lily. James walked closer, his steps silent on the plush carpet. He expected Lily to be thrashing, fighting, or perhaps passed out from exhaustion. But she wasn't. Lily's head was resting peacefully on Martha's shoulder. One of Martha's hands, large and rough from decades of scrubbing floors, was encompassing Lily's entire back, rubbing in slow, circular motions. The other hand held Lily's tiny feet, and Martha was humming. It was a low, rumbling sound, a melody James didn't recognize. It wasn't a nursery rhyme. It sounded ancient, deep, and vibrating with a soulful warmth that seemed to fill the cold, empty spaces of the room. James stopped 5 feet away. He watched as his daughter took a deep, shuddering breath, not a sob, but a breath of release, and snuggled deeper into the curve of the old maid's neck. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile played on Lily's lips. She was asleep. She wasn't just dozing. She was in a deep, restorative slumber, the kind of sleep she hadn't had since the day the police knocked on their door. James felt a lump form in his throat so painful he thought he might choke. He looked at Martha. The old maid looked up. She didn't look terrified. She didn't jump up and apologize. Her dark eyes, framed by wrinkles that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and harder sorrows, met the billionaire's gaze with a calm, profound intensity. She simply raised a finger to her lips. "Shh," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves over pavement. "The angel is fighting demons, Mr. Sterling, but she is winning now." James Sterling, the man who never cried, the man who had stood stoic at his wife's funeral because he had to be strong for the cameras, felt his knees give way. He reached out, gripping the edge of the changing table to steady himself. Tears, hot and unbidden, spilled over his cheeks. He watched the rise and fall of his daughter's chest. He watched the way her tiny hand gripped the fabric of Martha's cheap uniform, holding on as if it were a lifeline. "How?" James whispered, the word barely audible. "The doctors, the medicine. How?" Martha didn't stop rocking. She didn't stop rubbing Lily's back. She just smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "A machine has no heartbeat, sir," she said softly, "and a pill has no soul. This baby didn't need silence. She needed to know she wasn't alone in the dark." James slid down the side of the changing table until he was sitting on the floor, watching the miracle in the rocking chair. For the first time in 3 weeks, the house was quiet, and for the first time in 3 weeks, James Sterling closed his eyes and breathed. The golden cage. The peace lasted for 4 hours. For 4 glorious hours, the Sterling mansion was not a battleground. James had fallen asleep, right there on the nursery floor, leaning against the changing table, exhaustion finally claiming him. When he woke up, the room was dark, lit only by the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. He panicked for a split second, disoriented. Then he looked at the rocking chair. Martha was still there. She hadn't moved. She hadn't gone to the bathroom. She hadn't checked her phone. She sat like a statue of endurance, her arms still wrapped protectively around Lily. Lily was still asleep, but she had shifted, her little hand now resting on Martha's cheek. James scrambled to his feet, his joints stiff. He checked his watch. 8 p.m. You haven't moved, James whispered, awe coloring his voice. If I move, the cold comes back, Martha whispered back. Her voice was hoarse, but her grip was steady. She needs to complete the cycle, sir. Let her sleep until she wakes on her own. James nodded frantically. Yes, of course, whatever you say. At that moment, the nursery door creaked open. The spell was broken by the sharp, electric click of heels. Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper, marched in. She was a tall, severe woman who ran the Sterling household with military precision. Behind her trailed Miss Collins, the head nanny, looking indignant. "Mr. Sterling!" Mrs. Higgins hissed, her voice a sharp whisper. "We have been looking for you everywhere. Dinner is served," and she stopped, her eyes narrowing as they landed on the rocking chair. "Martha!" Mrs. Higgins barked, forgetting to whisper. "What on earth do you think you are doing?" Lily stirred. A whimper escaped her lips. "Quiet!" James snapped, turning on Mrs. Higgins with a ferocity that made the woman step back. "Lower your voice!" Mrs. Higgins flustered, smoothing her apron. "Sir, I apologize, but this is unacceptable. This woman is a cleaner. She is covered in dust and chemicals from the scullery. She has no business touching Miss Lily. It is unsanitary. It is against protocol." Miss Collins stepped forward, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Sterling, technically Mrs. Higgins is correct. We cannot monitor the child's vitals if she is being held by unauthorized personnel. We need to transfer her to the crib immediately to maintain the sleep hygiene schedule." "Sleep hygiene?" James let out a dark, dry laugh. He pointed a shaking finger at his sleeping daughter. "Look at her. Do you see that? That is sleep, actual sleep, something neither of you achieved in 20 days with your degrees and your protocols." "It's a fluke," Miss Collins sniffed. "Probably exhaustion finally taking over." "It is not a fluke," James said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "It is care." He turned back to Martha. "Martha, are you tired? Are you hungry?" "I am fine, sir," Martha said softly, though James could see the tremor of fatigue in her arms. "Mrs. Higgins," James commanded, not taking his eyes off the maid, "bring a plate of food, the good stuff, warm, and a glass of water. Bring it here now." Mrs. Higgins's jaw dropped. "Sir, you want me to serve the cleaning woman in the nursery?" "I want you to serve the woman who is saving my daughter's life," James said. "If you don't do it in 5 minutes, you can pack your bags." Mrs. Higgins turned purple with suppressed rage, but she nodded stiffly and spun on her heel, exiting the room. Miss Collins lingered, glaring at Martha. "I will note in my report that the sleep training was interrupted," the nanny said icily before leaving. When they were alone again, Martha looked at James. "You made enemies tonight, sir." "I don't care," James said, pulling up a velvet ottoman to sit near them. "Tell me, Martha, how did you know? How did you know what to do?" Martha looked down at Lily, brushing a curl away from the baby's forehead. Her expression softened into something distant and painful. "I had a daughter once," Martha said, her voice barely a murmur. "Long time ago, before I came to this country. We were poor. We didn't have monitors or white noise. When she cried, it was usually because she was cold or hungry or scared. I learned that a baby can hear your heart. If your heart is anxious, they are anxious. If your heart is steady, they are steady." She looked up at James. "This house, sir, it is beautiful. It is like a palace. But it is cold. Everyone who comes in here is worried about their job or the money or the rules. No one is just being. This little one lost her mama. She has a hole in her heart. You can't fill a hole in the heart with silence. You fill it with a song." James felt the tears prick his eyes again. He realized with a jolt of guilt that he had been part of the coldness. He had been so consumed by his own grief, burying himself in work, that he had left Lily to the professionals. He thought he was giving her the best money could buy. He didn't realize he was starving her of the one thing she needed. Can you teach me?" James asked, sounding like a child himself. "I don't know the song." "It's not the song, sir," Martha smiled. "It's the feeling. You have to put your own pain aside. You have to become the shelter." For the next 3 days, the routine changed. James cancelled his meetings. He stayed home. And against the furious protests of Mrs. Higgins and the nanny squad, he kept Martha in the nursery. Martha became Lily's shadow. She didn't use the crib. She carried Lily in a sling made from an old sheet while she dusted. James told her to stop cleaning, but she insisted she couldn't sit still. She fed Lily homemade broth instead of the organic nutrient paste the doctor prescribed, and at night she sat in the rocking chair, and Lily slept. The change in the child was miraculous. The color returned to her cheeks. The screaming stopped. Lily started to babble again. When James walked into the room, Lily would reach for him, and for the first time in months, she didn't cry when he held her. James felt like he was waking up from a coma. He watched Martha interact with Lily and tried to mimic her. He learned to hold Lily not like a fragile glass vase, but like a sturdy little human. He learned to hum. But downstairs, the storm was gathering. Mrs. Higgins sat in the kitchen, staring at the security feed on her tablet. On the screen, she saw James laughing as Martha showed him how to burp the baby. "It's unnatural," Mrs. Higgins spat, slamming her coffee mug down. "A man of his stature, taking lessons from a scrub woman. She's manipulating him. She's after his money." "She's definitely violating the hygiene codes," Miss Collins added, sitting across from her. "I saw her feed the baby something from a Tupperware container she brought from home. Who knows what bacteria is in that?" Mrs. Higgins' eyes lit up. A malicious smile spread across her thin lips. "Did you?" Mrs. Higgins asked slowly. "Did you see exactly what it was?" "No," Miss Collins admitted, "but it looked spicy, ethnic." "Perfect." Mrs. Higgins stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Mr. Sterling is leaving for a board meeting in Tokyo tomorrow morning. He'll be gone for 48 hours. So, Mrs. Higgins walked to the pantry and pulled out a small unlabeled jar of heavy spices she kept for her own cooking. "We need to prove that Martha is incompetent, dangerous even. If the baby gets sick, if the baby has a bad reaction to something Martha fed her, Mr. Sterling will have no choice." "Do you want to make the baby sick?" Miss Collins looked uneasy. "Don't be dramatic," Higgins scoffed. "Just a little upset stomach, enough to cause a scream. Enough to make the father panic. He's emotionally unstable right now. One bad night and he'll fire her." Mrs. Higgins looked at the ceiling, towards the nursery where the laughter was coming from. "Enjoy your moment in the sun, Martha," she whispered, "because when the master leaves, you're going back to the gutter." Upstairs, Martha felt a sudden chill. She stopped rocking and looked at the door. "What is it?" James asked, noticing her hesitation. "Nothing, sir," Martha said, clutching Lily tighter. "Just a shadow passing over the moon." But the feeling didn't go away. She looked at the innocent face of the baby sleeping in her arms and felt a heavy knot of dread in her stomach. She knew the world of the rich. She knew that when the powerful were happy, the servants were invisible. But when the powerful were angry, the servants were the first to bleed, and James Sterling was leaving in the morning. The sabotage. The morning James Sterling left for Tokyo, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with unshed rain. A black town car idled in the driveway, its engine a low purr, but James lingered in the nursery doorway. He looked at Martha, who was folding tiny onesies with hands that looked like gnarled roots, but moved with the grace of a pianist. Lily was awake in her playpen, banging a soft block against the bars, babbling a string of happy, nonsensical sounds. "I don't want to go," James admitted, tightening his tie. It felt like a noose. "You must," Martha said without looking up. "The world doesn't stop because the baby sleeps, Mr. Sterling. Go, do your business. We will be here." James walked over and placed a hand on Martha's shoulder. It was an intimate gesture, one that would have scandalized Mrs. Higgins had she been in the room. "If anyone tries to interfere with your routine, you call me. I don't care if I'm in a meeting with the Prime Minister. You call." "I will handle it, sir," Martha promised. "Go." James kissed Lily on the forehead, inhaled the scent of lavender and milk, and walked out. As soon as the heavy front door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It was subtle at first, like the drop in pressure before a tornado. Down in the kitchen, Mrs. Higgins watched the taillights of the limousine disappear through the security gates. She turned to Miss Collins. "It's time," she said. At 5 p.m., Martha came down to the kitchen to prepare Lily's evening bottle. She was meticulous. She washed her hands twice. She sterilized the bottle. She warmed the milk to exactly the right temperature, testing it on her wrist. "Leaving so soon?" Mrs. Higgins asked, leaning against the marble island, peeling an apple with a small, sharp knife. "I need to take this up. She gets fussy if it's late," Martha said, keeping her eyes down. "Oh, go on then," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice surprisingly sweet. "I'll just clean up here. Oh, Martha, could you fetch the fresh linens from the laundry room on your way up? Miss Collins said the crib sheets are dusty." Martha hesitated. The laundry room was down the hall. It would take 30 seconds. "All right, but watch the milk." "Of course." Higgins smiled. Martha stepped out. The moment she was out of sight, Mrs. Higgins moved with viper-like speed. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small glass vial. It contained a concentrated extract of ghost pepper, something she used for her spicy salsas, something that would burn the throat of an adult, let alone an infant. She uncapped the baby's bottle, dipped the tip of the nipple into the extract, and swirled a single drop into the milk. It vanished instantly. "Sweet dreams, Princess," Higgins whispered. When Martha returned with the linens, the kitchen was empty. She grabbed the bottle and hurried upstairs. 10 minutes later, the scream tore through the house. It wasn't a cry of tiredness. It was a shriek of pain. Martha, who had just begun to feed Lily, pulled the bottle away in horror. Lily was thrashing, her face turning a terrifying shade of crimson. She was clawing at her tongue, coughing, gagging. "Lily! Dios mio! What is it?" Martha cried, patting the baby's back, trying to soothe her. The door burst open. Mrs. Higgins and Miss Collins stood there, flanked by 2 burly security guards. "What did you do to her?" Mrs. Higgins roared, her acting impeccable. She just started screaming. "She's in pain," Martha stammered, her eyes wide with panic. "Something is wrong with her throat." "Grab the bag," Higgins barked at the security guard. "Check her bag." The guard snatched Martha's worn canvas tote from the floor. He dumped the contents onto the pristine white rug. A Bible, a bus pass, a spare uniform, and a small, distinct jar of red chili powder. Martha gasped. "That's not mine. I've never seen that." "Liar!" Higgins stepped forward, snatching the jar. "I knew it. You people and your spices, you tried to feed her that filth, didn't you? You put it in her food." "No, I swear on my life." Martha fell to her knees, reaching for Lily, who was still screaming, tears streaming down her burning face. "Let me help her. She needs water. She's burning. Get away from her." Miss Collins shoved Martha back. "You've done enough. You've poisoned her." "Security!" Mrs. Higgins pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Get this woman out of my house, now. If she resists, call the police." "No, please, Mr. Sterling left her in my charge." "Call him, call Mr. Sterling," Martha begged as the guards grabbed her arms. "Mr. Sterling is in the air," Higgins said coldly, picking up the sobbing baby and handing her to Miss Collins. "And when he lands, I will personally tell him how you tried to kill his daughter." They dragged Martha out. She fought them, not for herself, but for the child. She could hear Lily's screams echoing down the corridor, a sound of pure betrayal and agony. "Lily! Nana is here! Lily!" The heavy front doors slammed shut. Martha was thrown onto the gravel driveway. The rain had started. It poured down in sheets, soaking her instantly. She banged on the wood, crying, begging, until the lights in the house went out, one by one. Inside, the nightmare had returned. Lily vomited the milk, her throat raw. Miss Collins tried to force water down her throat, but the trust was broken. Lily wouldn't let anyone touch her. She screamed until her voice gave out, and then she screamed in silence, her body convulsing with hiccups and terror. Miss Higgins stood in the hallway, listening to the chaos. She smirked and typed a message on her phone to James Sterling's personal assistant. "Emergency. Incident with the maid. Lily in distress. Come home immediately." The truth unveiled. James Sterling did not wait for the return flight. He chartered a private jet the moment the message came through, costing him $100,000 he didn't care about. The flight back was an eternity of hell. He paced the cabin, unable to sit. The updates from Mrs. Higgins were vague and terrifying. Severe allergic reaction, maid negligence, possible poisoning. When the car screeched to a halt in front of the mansion at 4:30 a.m., the house was ablaze with lights. It looked like an operating theatre. James burst through the doors, his suit rumpled, his eyes wild. "Where is she?" he roared. Mrs. Higgins met him in the foyer. She was wearing a look of practiced concern, holding a cold compress. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, thank God. It's been horrific. Where is Lily?" "She's finally resting. The doctor gave her a mild sedative. She's upstairs with Miss Collins." James took the stairs two at a time. He burst into the nursery. The smell hit him first. Vomit and bleach. The room was sterile again. The warm, cozy atmosphere Martha had created was gone. Lily was in her crib. She looked tiny and pale, her lips swollen. She was whimpering in her sleep, her little hands twitching, as if fighting off invisible attackers. James reached through the bars and stroked her cheek. She flinched away from his touch. The rejection hit him like a physical blow. She had never flinched from him before. He turned slowly to face Mrs. Higgins, who had followed him in. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Tell me exactly what happened." "It was Martha, sir," Higgins said, lowering her voice to a somber whisper. "We found spices in her bag, hot chili powder. We believe she was mixing it into the baby's food. Some sort of old country remedy, perhaps? Or maybe she was just sadistic." Lily's throat was burned. She held out the plastic evidence bag containing the jar. James stared at it. He took the bag. He looked at the cheap plastic jar. Then he looked at Higgins. "Martha did this?" "We caught her red-handed, sir. She denied it, of course. We had to remove her by force. She was hysterical." James gripped the bag until his knuckles turned white. "Get out!" "Sir." "Everyone, get out. Leave me with my daughter." Higgins nodded, hiding a triumphant smile. "Of course, I'll be downstairs if you need anything." She closed the door. James stood in the silence. He looked at the jar again. Chili powder. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it made sense. He remembered the way Martha held Lily. He remembered the way she hummed. He remembered her eyes, ancient, sad, and infinitely kind. A woman who looked at a child like that didn't poison them. He remembered something else. 2 weeks ago, he had installed a new security system. He hadn't told the staff. He was paranoid about kidnappers, so he had installed hidden 4K cameras and high-fidelity microphones in every room, including the kitchen and the nursery. The feeds went directly to a private server in the basement, accessible only by his biometric scan. James put the jar down. He walked out of the nursery, locked the door from the outside, and went straight to his study. He sat at his computer, his hands shaking as he typed in the encryption key. He pulled up the footage from the previous afternoon. Camera, Yo4. Kitchen, 5:02 p.m. He watched Martha prepare the milk. He saw the care, the sterilization. He saw Higgins ask her to get the laundry. James leaned in, his breath hitching. On the screen, Mrs. Higgins waited until Martha was gone. She looked around, but she didn't look at the smoke detector where the camera was hidden. She pulled the vial from her pocket. The dip, the swirl, the smile. James froze the image on Mrs. Higgins's face. That smile. It was the smile of a monster. He fast-forwarded. He saw the discovery of the jar. He saw the security guard dump the bag. He saw the jar fall from the guard's sleeve before landing on the pile of Martha's things. It was a sleight of hand, clumsy but effective in the chaos. James slammed his fist onto the desk, shattering the glass surface. Blood trickled from his hand, but he didn't feel it. Rage. Pure, molten, blinding rage washed over him. But beneath the rage was a crushing weight of guilt. He had let them throw her out into the rain. The woman who had saved his daughter. He checked the time. 4:30 a.m. He didn't call the police. Not yet. That would be too easy for Mrs. Higgins. He grabbed his car keys. He needed to find Martha. He pulled up her employment file on his phone as he ran to the garage. The address listed was in the East Bronx, in a neighborhood James had only seen on the news during crime reports. He drove his Aston Martin like a madman, tearing through the sleeping city. The rain was still falling, washing the streets clean. He arrived at the tenement building an hour later. It was a crumbling brick structure with bars on the windows and graffiti on the doors. The contrast between this place and his mansion was nauseating. James ran up the 4 flights of stairs, the smell of stale cooking oil and damp concrete filling his lungs. He found apartment 4B. He pounded on the door. "Martha! Martha! It's James Sterling!" No answer. He pounded again, harder. "Martha! Please! I know the truth!" The door opened slowly. It wasn't Martha. It was a young Hispanic woman looking tired and scared. "Who are you?" "I'm looking for Martha. Does she live here?" The woman looked at his suit, his bloodied hand. "She's my aunt. She's in her room. She hasn't stopped crying since she came home. She's praying. She says she failed the baby." James felt his heart break. "Let me see her, please." The woman stepped aside. James walked into the tiny apartment. It was spotless. There were religious icons on the walls and photos of family. In the back room, sitting on a sagging bed, was Martha. She was still wearing her wet uniform. She was shivering, clutching a rosary, rocking back and forth, the same motion she used for Lily. "Martha!" She looked up. Her eyes were swollen, filled with fear. She tried to stand up. "Sir, Mr. Sterling, I swear I didn't." James crossed the room in 2 strides and fell to his knees in front of her. He took her rough, trembling hands in his own. "I know," James choked out. "I saw the video, Martha. I saw what that witch did. I saw everything." Martha stopped shaking. She looked at him, searching his face for a lie. "Lily," she whispered, "how is the baby?" "She's sick," James said, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "She's scared. She won't sleep. She won't let me hold her. She needs you, Martha. I need you." Martha looked at his hands, holding hers, the billionaire and the maid, kneeling on the floor of a project apartment. "They hurt her to hurt me," Martha said softly, a realization dawning on her. "I will destroy them," James promised, his voice dark. "But right now I don't care about them. I care about my daughter. Please, will you come back? I will give you anything. Double your salary, triple it. Just save us." Martha slowly pulled her hands away. She reached out and touched James's face, wiping a tear from his cheek. "I don't want your money, James," she said, using his first name for the first time. "I do this for the mothers who cannot be there. I do this because every child deserves to feel safe." She stood up, her old joints cracking. She smoothed her wet dress. "Take me to her. A new family." The drive back to the Sterling estate was silent, but it was a silence heavy with anticipation. The storm had passed, leaving the pre-dawn sky a deep, bruised blue. James drove with one hand on the wheel, his other hand occasionally gripping the console as if to anchor himself to reality. Beside him, Martha sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking out the window at the passing city lights, her face a mask of quiet resolve. They didn't speak of the past. They didn't speak of the future. They both knew that the next hour would define the rest of their lives. When the Aston Martin pulled through the wrought iron gates, the mansion was still awake. Lights blazed from every window, a beacon of anxiety in the dark landscape. James parked the car right at the front steps, not bothering to align it properly. He killed the engine. "Stay close to me," James said, his voice low and steel-hard. "I am not afraid of them any more, James," Martha replied softly. "I am only afraid for the little one." James nodded. He opened her door, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 24 hours ago, and they walked up the steps together. Inside, the foyer was a scene of staged crisis management. Mrs. Higgins was directing a team of cleaners to scrub the floors, though they were already spotless. Miss Collins was speaking in hushed tones to the night nurse. When the front door opened, everyone froze. Mrs. Higgins turned, a look of performative relief washing over her face. "Mr. Sterling, you're back. We were so worried. The police haven't arrived yet to take a statement about the—" Her voice died in her throat. She saw the figure standing behind James. Martha stepped into the light. She was still in her damp, wrinkled uniform, her hair slightly messy from the rain, but she stood with the posture of a queen. "What is she doing here?" Mrs. Higgins gasped, her face twisting into a sneer. "Sir, you cannot bring that woman back inside. She is a danger to—" "Silence," James said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command spoken with such absolute, icy authority that the air seemed to leave the room. The cleaners stopped scrubbing. The night nurse took a step back. "Sir, I must protest." Miss Collins stepped forward, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "As the primary caregiver, I cannot allow—" "You are not the primary caregiver," James cut her off, walking slowly toward them. "You are an accomplice." Confusion rippled through the staff. Mrs. Higgins straightened her spine, trying to regain control. "I don't know what lies she told you, Mr. Sterling, but we have the physical evidence. The chili powder—" "The chili powder you kept in the third drawer of the pantry?" James asked. Mrs. Higgins blinked. A flicker of genuine fear crossed her eyes. I don't know what you mean." James pulled his phone from his pocket. He didn't say a word. He simply tapped the screen and held it up. The video from the hidden kitchen camera played in high definition. The staff gathered around, craning their necks. They saw Mrs. Higgins alone in the kitchen. They saw the look of malice. They saw the vial. They saw the poisoning. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging in the air. Mrs. Higgins turned pale, her skin taking on the color of old parchment. She looked at the phone, then at James, then at the other staff members who were now looking at her with horror. It's doctored," she stammered, backing away. "Deep fake. It's technology. She's a witch. She did this." "The police are already at the gate," James said calmly. "I called them on the way. They aren't coming to take a statement about Martha. They are coming to arrest you for child abuse, assault with a weapon, and conspiracy to endanger a minor." As if on cue, the blue and red lights flashed through the front windows. The heavy thud of car doors closing echoed outside. "No," Higgins whispered. She turned to Miss Collins. You saw it! Tell him!" Miss Collins, realizing the ship was sinking, stepped away from Higgins as if she were radioactive. I didn't see anything. I just did what Mrs. Higgins told me. She said Martha was dangerous. I was tricked. You stood by while my daughter screamed, James said, looking at the nanny with disgust. You watched her vomit and did nothing but blame an innocent woman. You're fired. Get out of my house before I have you arrested too. Miss Collins dropped her clipboard and ran toward the servants' exit without looking back. 2 officers entered the foyer. James pointed at Mrs. Higgins. That's her. The scene that followed was ugly. Mrs. Higgins screamed, she cursed, she threatened to sue, she called Martha every name in the book as they handcuffed her, but Martha didn't flinch. She didn't even look at the woman who had tried to destroy her. Martha was looking up the stairs. From the nursery on the 2nd floor, a sound drifted down, a weak, hoarse cry, a cry of utter exhaustion and loneliness. Go, James said to Martha. Martha didn't wait. She moved toward the stairs, her heavy shoes thumping against the carpet. She ascended not as a servant, but as a savior. James stayed behind to deal with the police, but his heart was upstairs. Martha opened the nursery door. The room was cold. The window was open, letting in the damp night air, another one of Higgins's punishments disguised as fresh air therapy. Lily was lying in the crib, curled into a tight ball. She wasn't moving much. Her eyes were swollen shut. Her breathing was jagged, punctuated by little hiccups of distress. Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but she swallowed them. This was not the time for grief. This was the time for strength. Mi amor, she whispered. Lily froze. Her little head lifted slightly. She knew that voice. Martha walked to the crib. She lowered the side rail. She didn't care about the vomit on the sheets or the smell of sickness. She reached in and scooped the baby up. Lily didn't fight. The moment she felt the familiar warmth of Martha's chest, the moment she smelled the scent of soap and rain, she collapsed. Her tiny body, which had been rigid with tension for hours, went completely limp. She buried her face in Martha's neck and let out a long, shuddering sigh. Martha sat in the rocking chair. She wrapped her arms around the child, creating a cocoon that no cold could penetrate. It's okay, Martha hummed, beginning the rhythm, back and forth, back and forth. Nana is here. The bad dreams are gone. She began to sing. It was the same lullaby, a Spanish folk song about the moon watching over the sleepy fields. Her voice was rough with emotion, but it was steady. James stood in the doorway. He had finished with the police. He watched them. He saw the color slowly returning to his daughter's face. He saw her breathing deepen. He saw the peace return to the room, a tangible force that pushed away the shadows. For the first time in his life, James understood what true wealth was. It wasn't the marble floors or the private jets. It was this. It was the ability to protect the people you love. And he had almost lost it because he was too blind to see the value of a human heart. He walked into the room and knelt beside the rocking chair. He rested his head against the armrest, close to Martha and Lily. "Thank you," he whispered. Martha stopped singing for a moment. She rested her hand on James's head, stroking his hair just as she stroked Lily's. "We are home now," she said. 6 months later, the Sterling estate was unrecognizable. Physically, the structure was the same. The marble was still there, the high ceilings, the expensive art. But the atmosphere had undergone a complete metamorphosis. The heavy velvet drapes that used to block out the sun had been replaced with light, airy linen. The windows were thrown open, letting in the spring breeze and the sound of birds. The sterile, museum-like silence was gone, replaced by the chaotic, joyful soundtrack of life. In the center of the living room, a fortress had been constructed out of expensive sofa cushions and blankets. "Attack!" shouted a deep voice. James Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, crawled out from behind the wet bar on his hands and knees. He was wearing a T-shirt and sweatpants, attire that would have caused his board of directors to faint. He was holding a stuffed dragon. "Roar!" James yelled, charging the pillow fort. A peal of laughter erupted from inside the fortress. Lily, now 2 years old and running on sturdy little legs, popped up. She shrieked with delight and threw a soft ball at her father's head. "Nana, help! The dragon!" Lily screamed, giggling. From the kitchen, Martha emerged. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a floral blouse and comfortable slacks. Her hair was still in a bun, but it was looser now, less severe. She carried a tray of cut fruit and juice. "No dragons in the house before lunch," Martha declared, setting the tray down on the coffee table. James collapsed onto the rug, pretending to be defeated by the ball. Lily jumped on top of him, cheering. "You got him, Chiquita!" Martha laughed, wiping her hands on a towel. James sat up, holding his daughter in his lap. He looked at Martha. She looked younger than she had 6 months ago. The lines of stress around her mouth had softened. She smiled more. She was the grandmother of this house in every way that mattered. Mrs. Higgins was gone, currently awaiting trial. The new staff James had hired were different, younger, kinder, and personally vetted by Martha. The rule in the house was simple. If you don't love the home, you don't work in the home. James picked up a slice of apple and handed it to Lily. "Martha," James said, "the lawyers sent over the adoption papers for the honorary grandmother clause we talked about. I want to make sure you have legal rights. If anything happens to me, I want you to be her guardian. I don't trust anyone else." Martha stopped. She looked at James and then at the little girl who was currently trying to feed the stuffed dragon a piece of melon. "You are a young man, James. You are going to live a long time," Martha said. "But—" She paused, her eyes shimmering. "I will sign them. She is my blood now, not by birth, but by love." James smiled. It was a genuine, unburdened smile. "By the way," he added, "I have a meeting in London next week, 3 days. Go," Martha waved a hand. "We have plans. We are going to plant the vegetable garden." "I was thinking," James said, "maybe I don't go. Maybe I send the VP. I'm not sure I want to miss the planting." Martha laughed. "You stay then. The vegetables need a strong back to dig the holes." James lay back on the rug, staring up at the crystal chandelier that used to look so imposing and now just looked like a bright, shiny decoration. Lily curled up on his chest, thumb in her mouth, tired from the battle. "Sing it, Nana," Lily mumbled, half asleep. Martha sat on the sofa above them. She began to hum. The old melody filled the sunlit room, weaving through the furniture, wrapping around the father and the daughter. The billionaire closed his eyes, listening to the old maid's song. He had millions in the bank, companies across the globe, and power beyond measure. But as he drifted off to sleep on the floor of his own living room, holding his sleeping child, James Sterling knew he had finally found the only thing he had ever really been poor in. He had found a family. The end.